Sorry it's a day late. I tried to do it yesterday, but I ran into some hiccups. And also, I wanted to. I don't know if y'all are like this, but it's like you just want to make something better, even though it's not important at the moment, but you just like get obsessed with it. Anyway, I redid the input buffer stuff, which goes along with the actual topic for today, which is motion controls. And that is a very bad topic title. I'm probably going to change that because it's not like motion physically, it's like motion like this. So specifically, it's things like, double tap to dash, which you can see. In our input buffer on the left, I'm dashing, but I'm not hitting any of our regular attack buttons here. So if I'm holding them all, you can see they're all getting used. If I do tap tap, we're dashing. And we're also going to do some cooler stuff. And so we're only using one attack button for all these. So that's pretty sweet. So let's get to it. Main thing, I guess I can keep this up. How I do it, so one of the little overhauls I did is going up and down here is the buffer. So it's like, I think it's like 20 or 25 deep right now. And then left and right is all of our raw inputs, which is our like directional inputs here. And then, all of our buttons. That far one was like just a helper thing. And then over here we have our motion inputs. What do I call them? Yeah, motion commands. So these we set up here. They're made up of just a name. There's things like a window and stuff. I haven't implemented it yet, but it would be easy to implement. And then a set of commands. This one is none, so it's always true. And that just in our move list editor lets us, have them, so we don't have to have a motion command necessarily. And then so look here, like forward. I just do two, greater than symbols. That way it's just easier to see in here. And you could do like forward, but I do shortened names so I can keep this small. So it's actually made up of 4 commands. Like for this to work, we want to go neutral, and we want to go forward, and we want to go neutral, and we want to go forward. So that's the basic framework for those. But how do we check to make sure that's happening? So, and I'll have to, there's a little bit of a shortcoming in this one. Similar to like our input buffer here, like we hit X and pause it. When we go through right here, this little greater than symbol means it got used up. That doesn't happen yet with motion controls. The video was already a day late, so I really wanted to get it out. I was trying real hard, and all of a sudden it was like 10 p.m. again today. And I worked on it all day on Wednesday too, but it just didn't go so hot. I don't know why. And today went by really fast. Anyway. So that's something we'll have to fix. And actually, in some instances you'd want it, in others you wouldn't. Like if you do, I don't know, like you're playing Guilty Gear and you do Volcanic Viper, and then you Roman cancel it, like not necessarily in the new one because there's like a time stop, but you Roman cancel and then you hit slash again, that DP motion will stay in the buffer, at least with this implementation. And if you hit slash, you wouldn't get like the uppercut motion. And there's cases where you would, like, you don't want to like clear the whole buffer. So let's say you're playing, Street Fighter 3 and you do a Shoryuken and you do another quarter circle forward into a punch, then that cancels into your super, even though your super is double quarter circle forward. So you kind of want to use up maybe the motion command, but you don't want to like clear out the whole buffer. So despite all that explanation, we're not going to get into that too much, but that's the reason why. I'll get to it soon. And once I get this all like fleshed out and stuff, and people have been requesting like a fighting game video, we will, like a tutorial rather, how to develop them. We'll get more into that. but a lot of what we learn here can be used for fighting game, even though it's more of a character action game. So you'll see in the top right here how these are like -1. It means they're not active. But if I do like the 360, it goes to 0 or to 1. And if I double tap, it goes to 1. That means that becomes active. So part of the overhaul of what I did is we do this buffer here. We update it like we had been doing. We just press buttons and they live in the buffer for a while. Like this. And they get updated until they leave the buffer. And if we use them, we're checking our commands, we go through this buffer. But what I'm doing instead is for all these raw inputs, visually here it's at the top, they're set to 0. Let me do a good example. They're actually set to, or they're set to -1, and they're set to the actual spot in the buffer when it's going to get used. So right now it's at 13, and that's just like the last time it was used. The number's not important necessarily. And then when it gets used up, it becomes -1. So the check, when we look at our skills here, instead of looking through the buffer, gosh darn it. Sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. We just look at this. So this is like, attack 1, attack 2, jump, dash, and things like that. And so instead of checking through the whole buffer, we just let it know that this button is ready to be used. It's real similar, it's just sort of, it's more modular now. In some ways it's a lot faster, in some ways it's not. But I like that it's more modular, so in any case I do that. And then we do the same thing with these motion commands. So these hang out, we define them here. These motion commands. So we have 7, we have our none, which is like always active, so it means that one's always true. So anything that has a none requirement will always work, as long as we hit the other part of the requirement, which is hitting a button. We define them right here, and we'll go to that double tap forward. So what it's looking at to decide, it's at -1, meaning it's not active, it's not available, we haven't input that. But if we hit forward, it becomes active, so now it's +1. So these two here are our, I'm actually gonna go, oh, this is fine. These are our X and Y on our stick. And so we need to figure out a way to decide what's neutral and what's forward. In a fighting game, except for when you switch sides, well, that's an easy thing to manage. What am I trying to say here? Neutral is just, nothing on the stick. That one's easy to figure out. But forward, like, where is that? So we have a bit of an interpreter. And I guess what I meant to explain is that it's going to go through the buffer right here. And it's going to check to see if there was a neutral input. And you'll have to forgive these numbers here. They mean something a little bit different. Neutral in this case. Normally I do like 5, like numpad notation. So the zeros are neutral in this case. And anything not 0 is sort of a, I don't know how to explain it. It's just how long it's been held. So it's not really showing us the direction. So for now, just know that, I guess I could, like even if I made it so it showed the direction, it's just going to be, -1s and 1s and things like that. So anyway, for each one of these, it looks at the buffer, and in this case, we're just explicitly, it's not very generic, we're explicitly just going to look at the stick, because it's our quote-unquote motion controls, motion inputs. So for none, it always just passes. And then for forward, this is the left stick and the right stick. We'll only just look at this one just for ease. Or excuse me, the x-axis and the y-axis of the left stick. So it begins a check every frame. After updating the buffer, we update all of our motion controls here. So it starts here at 0. So it's looking for a neutral input. It starts at the top, -1, there's not one there. Here we have a neutral input, so we'll step forward 1. So we're right here, going, we're still neutral, go here, we'll step forward 1 because we have a forward input. And we go through here, and we're down to this neutral input, and so we're waiting, and finally we get a neutral input here. We'll step forward 1 more, wait for that last forward, and we get it right here. So now this becomes available, and it doesn't really do anything yet. It just means we've done that input. And, after we've updated all this, we look through our move list here to see if anything requires that. Some crackling. When I hit the mute button this last video, it crackled a lot, which stunk. Still kind of getting over a cold. And I went on a really long bike ride yesterday, and it kind of you get lots of dust and pollen and stuff in your lungs. Streaming okay. In the chat, no. Anyway, had to clear my throat there. So another one of the updates we did this past week was to do a priority. You could sort this list before runtime, but I like just kind of having it. If we're not taking a performance hit, then we're not going to worry about it yet. So it used to be that we would cancel and then we would just stop checking. Once one of these was met, we would just jump out of the buffer and say we're going to do this and cancel into our next move. Another way you could do it is to pre-sort this, so that way you would do the same thing, and then as you go through, just the higher priority ones would get checked first. So generally, the more complex inputs are higher priority, because if you hit A, you normally get a slash, but if you do forward A and get this, launching attack, if this gets checked first, then you'll never be able to use this move. So you can either pre-sort it, or you can just look through them all, which is what I do, and have a priority system. And with this priority system, you could implement it either way. Using this data, you can use it to pre-sort, or you can just do it at every frame. I mean, it's still every frame anyway. So what it does is it goes through everything, and before actually canceling it, it looks at every single move. So it's all that same stuff we've done before. It checks all that nonsense that we've done in previous videos, makes sure to see if we can cancel, make sure all these other conditions are met. But then checks to see if the next step dot priority is greater than, and you can do greater than or equal if you want to. Might be helpful for some things, but I think it's fine to just do greater than. It's just a personal preference. I could see why you'd want both, though, if you don't want to bother with making certain strings having to put one. So these are just a little bit more priority than these, because you do need that, unfortunately, with this. It will repeat this spot if you don't have a higher priority one here. So basically, it checks that if the next step, which is the next, it's not necessarily a step in a chain right here, it's just anything in here. If it has a higher priority, then it'll go ahead and say, okay, this one's in the highest standing right now, and then we do that current priority, which is updating constantly, will equal that next step dot priority. The next time we check, it'll skip over any that are lower priority. I am forgetting at the moment, because I did this earlier today, it might make more sense to have it up here, this priority check, but there was a reason not to, and I think if I took it away and put it here and ran it, we'd figure it out, but I am forgetting why. I don't know, it gave problems. It was skipping the wrong things and stuff. maybe y'all can understand it. But and then if you implement it a little bit different, maybe it'd be okay. But anyway, so it goes through there, checks everything, and then if start state happened, at least one cancel was okay, and we saved those indexes of those states and things. That's really the only nuisance, honestly, is like you kind of have to save that stuff because we were already looking at our move list and we're on this one, but now you just have to sort of save some sort of reference to it, which is fine. Then we cancel like normal, we did in the previous videos. And so whatever one has the highest priority will go through. So you could have it so like these are more generic where you have the motion commands and like the raw commands. I don't know, it's just a thought, I guess. What I'm getting at is that what's cool about having it, at least how we have it, is that we can do like the double tap to do the motion, and we don't have to necessarily do like a raw input. So now if I do double tap and attack, I do this uppercut, which is dope. And that would be this right here. So you'll notice that I'm actually dashing first, and the only reason that really works is because you can cancel out of that dash right away. So that's just sort of the issue you'd have with like overlapping sort of attacks. You could have it so if you're in this dash, you have a whole separate move list. If you didn't want that necessarily, like being able to cancel out of it right away. And it's also an instance where that example I gave where you do like Shoryu, and then you Roman cancel it or whatever, and then hit slash again, and you get another Shoryu if you don't eat these inputs. But in this case, we want that. Like, it's nice that we can do a double tap that gives us a dash, or gives us this launching attack if we hit jump or hit attack as well. So that's just something you'll want to set here. And I'll try and update that soon. Definitely by next week, I hope. I'm just getting kind of tired of working on this input buffer thing. I mean, it's really exciting, but it just... Wednesday and today just went by in a flash, and I was just working on it all day, and I'm just like, what? So, like I mentioned in a fighting game, what forward is pretty, pretty easy to understand, right? It's the directions, if we have like a fixed camera, oh my god, sorry, the dash input is a little too loose. Left and right and things like that, it's absolute. We don't have to worry about it. So when we do our check, we have these button command checks, which were whether or not these buttons are available. Again, we check the buffer and then just let them know what buttons are available, and then let the upcoming checks know that the buttons are available or that these motion inputs are available. So these are held in separate lists. And then we update the buffer like we had before, where we take the oldest ones and move them up, and then that leaves one spot at the bottom for the newest one, and we just update that. Look at our inputs. And then we do that check here. What was I getting at? Sorry. Sorry, a bunch of thoughts filled my head. What were we talking about? Oh, right. So then we do our motion command check. So for each one, we put this sort of counter at 0. And if like I mentioned, if, we meet all the requirements, or, the requirement for that first one as we go through the input buffer, we're neutral, we hit an input, we go up twice there, wait for another neutral, get another forward, and we pass once we I'm sorry, get through all these. So what is forward exactly? So we have this test check here, and we pass, like I mentioned, it's not very generic. We just pass specifically, round inputs 4, round inputs 5, which is our left stick, X and Y. And this is a separate one. This is another little hack I had to do for 360 motions, like in, Legend of Zelda. I'm happy that I got it to work, and honestly, in the end, if it works, right? But I was trying to, in a fighting game, it's just so easy, and I think that's what I mentioned in the beginning of the video, where it's like, you get really caught up in something stupid, and it's like, I bet I could make this way more generic, and like, ugh. I know I use that word a lot, but so it can be kind of annoying. Anyway, we do this chest check, and we see if, our current input, whether neutral or forward, matches that one. And then we go to the next step. And if once we, again, get higher than the number of commands or equal to it, then we do a full clear and like this motion command's available. So we have this little utility function here called get in umpad direction. So what it does, I pass an enum here, and it actually doesn't matter too much because it's actually within the same object. It's just how I had it set up earlier. So our first check here is just to see if our X and Y are in the dead zone. So if we're greater than the dead zone, then we go here and do some more complicated stuff. If we're not, then we just pass neutral. So that means our 6 neutral. So what we need to do is just basically the same thing as our camera relative movement that we did in a previous video. We hit up here, and I go into the foreground. If I hit down, go this way, left, right. So what that means, instead of having y-axis on our stick, be y-axis in world space, it's, oh man, I can't think of the word, translated into camera screen space. So left and right actually moves us left and right relative to the camera. And so we basically do the same thing, but instead of the camera, we do it based on the character. But it's actually like both. So this really tripped me up that first day I was working on it, because I thought simply that I would just need it relative to the player. But what I need to do is take our stick inputs, X and Y here, and translate that just like our camera control movement, or camera movement control, camera based, you know what I'm trying to say, oh my gosh. Translate that into relative to the camera, but then also make that relative to the player. So this is real similar to that camera one. It's I don't know, a long time ago now, the video about doing the cameras. But basically, we turn the Y into the forward of the camera, and then the X is the right of the camera. And then we zero out the Y and make that a new angle. And then we just grab the character, our main character, take their forward, and zero out their Y. We don't necessarily zero it out, but we do vector2.angle, and that gives us the angle between that, the character forward, and the camera relative stick, the stick relative to the camera forward. So between those two, I'm pressing up. I mean, that gives us up here. But if she's facing to the right and I hit up, that would give us an angle that was like this. And in world space, it's actually like this. We were facing down here, and now we're facing this way. So it's a lot different. And so we do all those different translations to get some angles. And simply, this is just my code from Aces Wild, basically. I actually had a more complicated And it was a lot different than the like examples I found, like in Unity answers. And I remember looking it up, like this is like over 10 years ago now, maybe, which was gross. But anyway, there's this helper one. It's just called vector2.angle. So we'll just use that instead. Ignore this for now. This is for that little hack I talked about. What this gives us is an angle between, and it's unsigned. So whether it's to the left of forward or to the right of forward, it's going to give us like, you know, that 45 degrees or whatever it is until we get all the way behind, which is 180. So basically it's less than 45, that'll be our forward. Else, so if it's greater than that or equal to that, but still less than 135, that's going to give us a side one. And then otherwise, it's going to give us a back. So we're going to pass forward, or we're going to pass back, side, or we're going to pass back. You may be realizing that, you know, as we move around, that changes a lot, even within the buffer, right? And so our inputs stay raw, like they stay -1 and 1, you know, just our raw stick inputs. And they do change. Like this buffer, like the same spot, the same input in the buffer, if I do a turn like that, the actual input does change. So but that's okay because this checks every frame. So what it's generally going to do is check the whole thing once we hit a button. But you can run into issues. So we have this. I've also implemented a simple target. So if we hold R, we'll just target. And if we attack, we do that. And much like in Devil May Cry, if we hit back and attack, we'll do a launcher, right? So that's the issue, right? So if we hit back and attack, you know, generally maybe that's okay. But there's going to be instances where maybe we cancel out of it and we get that back input where we don't want it. That's just sort of a game design thing. It's not necessarily a shortcoming. You know, you could make it so this back attack here only comes out if you're targeting, and then you have a separate input for it. Just something to keep in mind. But basically, you know, that kind of wraps it up. We have these more advanced things here, or not more advanced, but just, you know, other types of inputs. So we do back forward. You know, we had this, the dash. And if we attack out of it, we get our forward attack, which is this launcher. But if we do back forward, do this sort of overhead attack. And if we do back forward and jump, we get this kick. Something else we could do. See, the buffer is a little too generous. I'm getting moves I don't want. But yeah, I mentioned this is gonna be a short video. I think I covered it all. It's a lot of ums. And then of course we have the 360 input here. So if I do a 360 hand attack, we get this. So that is, where is it? Right here. It's just a bit of a hack. What I do is we check this angle. So we store an angle in each one of these, which is also bad because this is supposed to be just our data. Should store it somewhere else is what I'm getting at. And it, instead of doing it relative to the player or anything, it just, it takes an absolute angle. You could do it relative to the player. It's going to be a little bit tricky. And that's where it starts to get really tricky because you could make it so you could only do it when you're targeting, and that's what Devil May Cry does, right? So that way your back forward inputs always come out right, and you don't get, you know, an accidental launcher like that just by hitting backwards. Like if I wanted to target another enemy, I get a different attack, and that's bad. So you're just gonna have to find your own solution, whether or not you want to have like targeting and things like that. Anyway, what this does, this is pretty specific to just like 360 degree stuff. If you're doing like quarter circle forward motions and things like that, you're generally just going to want it in a fighting game. I mean, you might want like quarter circle motions relative to your player. I don't know. In a character action game, it's a little weird. 360 motion, I understand, but what we do is just we don't do any of that translating. Well, we do with the stick, and I'm not sure that even matters. But we just do a relative to 0, 1, and then we uptick an angle based on a previous angle. And so at the beginning of the input buffer, we set this current angle to 0, and then we look through the buffer and check those angles. And so instead of seeing if the angle is like just in front of the character or whatever, we check to see its difference between the previous angle and then upticks that. And once it gets past a set value here, then it will be available. So we rotate around, that'll give us a 360. And, you know, again, what's neat to have, not necessarily need like an input. That's kind of funny. We do a 360, we kind of like or Mario's, like you get a spin. If you can see, I'm not hitting jump. I do a 360 motion and I get a jump. So I think that's pretty dope. You know, in the newer Marios, you'll actually spin first and then your moveset changes from there, which is, you know, like I mentioned with the dash, you could do that instead. So you have all these different sort of movement options, and then you hit a button. You get different attacks. You may want to do that just for fun, like not necessarily mechanically that much different, but like if you attack, there's an enemy behind you and you press back and attack, you get just like a different animation, even though it might not be that much different of an attack. Thought there was maybe one more thing I needed to mention. 30 minutes in, it's actually pretty good. Let's write some notes down. But that about covers it. Real quick review. We updated the input buffer, so now it actually goes through it all, updates it, you know, based on what buttons we're pressing. And instead of checking then, it holds onto that buffer and then checks our motion inputs, which for each one of these that we define here, you know, we could make a new one. Head and you like triple forward, I suppose. And like I mentioned here, this is how long you've been holding it. This is how you can get, like, you know, charge moves in fighting games. So if you hold it and hit forward, as long as that value was big enough, you've been holding it long enough, things like that. We actually need 6. We want to go neutral, forward, because this lets us know that it's like actually a tap. You can kind of get away with not having those neutral inputs in there, but it kind of makes it cleaner. It'll help you with like when you're turning around and stuff. You're still going to get overlaps, so you're going to have to just, you know, experiment. New attack. I got mad for some reason. Not sure why I got mad. A little weird, a little bit of a bug. Shouldn't matter too much, but kind of strange. Oh, it's super mattered. I don't know why it's mad. Dang it. Right when I was wrapping up the video. This is just a bug, though. It's not really. But now I'm like, Didn't just need to reload it. Yeah, that was weird. I think it was just a sort of a cleanup thing. Notice. Well, doesn't seem to be working. I think that was the problem. You can see the overlap there. I'm trying to jump, but I'm not getting a flip jump. Look at our jump here. See, it's 0. And that's where, in the beginning of the video, where I said you could just do it greater than or equal to, so that you don't have to mess with stuff that's generally going to be the same. Just stuff down the list will have a higher priority. But we'll go ahead and just do that. And now we get the flip when we jump. We could change it to like back, forward, back. This one might not work quite well. I have that other kick, that other flip that's... Oops. It's not quite working. But I think if we... Yeah, there we go. That's just one of the shortcomings with, like, if you don't do the targeting. When I hold the targeting, it comes out fine, but anyway. That'll do. Support continues to be great. Y'all are being very helpful and appreciate all your questions. If you want to support me in these videos, as always, the assets, the projects, and everything are free. It's sort of one of our highest ideals here is free and open information. So if you have any questions, let me know. These will be available for download on the YouTube video. If you want to support it all, check out patreon.com/culture attack. I would love it if you just donated $1 a month. I've mentioned before, I'm really trying to figure out how to incentivize the lower level ones. Because again, the idea is to just have all this stuff available, and if you find value in it and can spare some change, go ahead and do that. But if you can't, it's okay either. That's okay too, excuse me. I want this to be out there, and I'm available for one-on-one help. I love doing it. It's always fun. Just hit me up. If you have game design questions, fighting game questions, visual effects design questions, character design questions, whatever. Yeah, check out that Patreon. It really, really helps. And if you have any ideas on incentives for lower levels, like I mentioned, it's just hard because the majority of the content is out there already. So anyway, sorry if I'm speaking low. Again, my roommates are fast asleep. But I appreciate y'all very much. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm also on Twitter at Culture Attack. And catch you later.